So inside the Lords this week, well, there's quite a lot going on because mainly for me, the online safety bill is being properly discussed in committee. And if you remember, at committee stage, there's lots of amendments through which you go line by line through what is a very complicated bill. The sad news is that there are very few people attending the debates at committee on the online safety bill, and I mean hardly anyone from the Conservative benches. I'm afraid that I've been very disappointed that the majority of Conservative backbench MPs, what am I talking about, Lords, who might well be sympathetic to free speech or not in the chamber. Real, kudos to Daniel Moylan, Lord Moylan, because he's put in loads of amendments, but there's really he and I and a few others. I also would like to note that on the Lib Dem benches, there is at least some attempt by some of the Lib Dems to remember that they're Liberal. And therefore, I have found a few allies on a few issues like things such as encryption and privacy, where they've been really very positive. But honestly, this bill is a nightmare. I cannot begin to stress to you how draconian and censorious the whole piece of legislation is. And it seems a real shame to me that there aren't more people taking an interest in it and really scrutinising it. Because, if you're going to be in the Lords, that's what the job is, even if we think it's undemocratic. And on other bills, the place is packed out. And I can assure you next week when the illegal immigration bill is discussed, the place will be full of people saying they support civil liberties, but apparently civil liberties when it comes to free speech online are forgotten, well and truly forgotten. As a consequence of which, and I've got a croaky voice, I'm not at my best because I've done my back in, partly moving back into my flat, long story, carrying boxes. When you've done your back in that way, what you really should not do is sit in one place for 8 hours. And in fact, that's what I did for the online safety bill this week, because there was not enough other people who were going to be on the side of free speech. And so I had to kind of stick it out and bear it, and it's finally done me in. Sorry. So what you should look out for, and I've got the speeches below here so you can have a look at them. Things to note are that even the sections that are about protecting children, the amendments that have been put forward by most of the other Lords are constantly to make it more difficult for adults to access material online, but in the name of protecting children. And we even had a situation which I thought was really dispiriting, where in, I think, a perfectly reasonable discussion about whether zero risk was ever achievable for children on or offline, and Daniel Moylan was making some very useful points on that. There was an interruption by one of the Lords who wants to really emphasise safetyism at the expense of all freedoms. You had the temerity, I thought, to remind those of us who were raising objections of the parents of children who had committed suicide or been bullied or suffered as a consequence of some of the online material that we had. And that was a real attempt at morally blackmailing us into not objecting to anything, really chilling. And I think that we've got to be brave in the face of that and just carry on regardless. So do take a look at the speeches that I did this week. Next week, Tuesday afternoon and evening, all day Thursday into the evening, there will be very important amendments coming up which you should keep your eye on. And you don't have to agree with me to know that this legislation will change everything about how we interact online. And therefore, from a democratic point of view, I really want you to understand what's in it and follow the debate as much as you can, at least know it's going on. Know that although they've removed legal but harmful from the bill, there's lots of attempts to sneak it back in via amendments, and the government themselves have simply outsourced legal but harmful to the terms and conditions parts of the companies, the big tech companies. saying that they must enforce their own terms and conditions, even though that will mean that they will be therefore encouraged by the British state to ban and remove material that is legal but harmful according to what? Silicon Valley's rules of engagement, and that is a very dangerous state of affairs. So keep your eye on that. Also, next week we're going to be coming back to the Higher Education Free Speech Bill, which has been ping-ponging between both the Commons and the House of Lords. In the House of Lords, the last time it was there, I'm afraid it was government ministers who kind of collapsed and accepted a compromise amendment. The government has now come back with the kind of halfway house as to whether you can sue universities or not if you are the victims of cancel culture. But the most important thing is this legislation is likely to be passed next week. I will be there for that moment. And goodness knows, if you've been following what's been happening in Edinburgh University, the fact that the Edinburgh Academics for Academic Freedom group have been yet once more denied the right to show the film Adult Female Human, and I might have even got the name wrong, Adult Human Female, is that right? And also the shenanigans at Bristol University, where a feminist group were denied the right to have a meeting. We really do need to tackle, never mind online, the fact that censorship on campus is actually becoming worse. Despite people saying that things are improving, actually too many people in authoritative positions in universities just are cowards and will not face down those people and activists who use the heckler's veto to stop events happening. Luckily, we're not just dependent on what happens in Parliament, and there are people who are organising fight backs, and I just want to give credit to my colleagues at Living Freedom, who this week held a very successful event, a Living Freedom event at Oriel College, on what we can learn from Locke, what we can learn from Milton, and with Tiffany Jenkins and Andrew Doyle. And it was a packed house and a really good event. And there's going to be a special Substack on the Living Freedom Summer School, and I would urge you, if you know anyone between the ages of 18 and 30, to get involved in that, because it's going to be young people who are really going to be crucial in leading any fight back for free speech on campus. Also next week, we're going to be discussing the illegal migration bill. It's going to be, as I say, full of people who will say, we can't let this piece of legislation pass. It's going to be highly controversial. I myself am not happy about the fact that too many people frustrated with the government want to blame immigration for a lot of social problems we have. That seems to me to be the wrong response. But on the other hand, I'm also very sympathetic to those who are frustrated with the laws declaring that they will just not let this bill pass. Because, as I've indicated, there's a certain double standard that if they really believed in civil liberties and freedom, then they would actually do something about those pieces of legislation that are being enacted in relation to free speech, and they're nowhere to be seen. What else is happening? Well, of course, inside the Lords this week, it's been a coronation frenzy. The King visited at some stage. I missed it, I have to say. But also, there's been a range of garden parties. So I had a couple of guests, and were just visiting the House of Lords, visiting me, and I was showing them round. And one of the guests actually asked me whether all the women in the House of Lords had to wear hats. And I realised it was because she'd seen so many people in their finery with their hats on off to the garden parties. She thought it was some kind of rule of thumb. Luckily it isn't. And I have managed to avoid wearing a hat in the House of Lords. The other thing that happened this week, which was quite interesting, was that I actually went in to the Levelling Up bill, which I can't follow as carefully now because I'm so busy with the online safety bill. I wanted to speak on the Green Belt and the fact that there was amendments to institutionalise on the face of the law the Green Belt, which I think is yet another example of why we will never build anything, or never, the housing crisis will never be solved, because the whole of the Levelling Up bill, as I've discussed last week, has been taken over by people saying you can't do that. So I worry about you can't say that a lot of the time, but this is you can't do that. Think of the environment, think of biodiversity, now it's think of the Green Belt. And sadly, my little speech that I prepared to make, I didn't actually cope with actually standing up in time because I wasn't able to stand up because I've got my back, done my back in. And so every time I went to stand, I kept falling back down. And one of the funny rules that I discovered was, in order to kind of propel myself into a standing position, I bought myself an umbrella because I didn't really know where to buy a walking stick from. Of course, if I'd have thought about it, the house always is full of walking sticks, right? It's the place to find the spare walking stick. But anyway, I asked permission to bring the umbrella in, and I discovered a new rule that I didn't know about, which is you're not allowed to take props into the House of Lords. So once they ascertained that I wasn't going to put the umbrella up and do a rendition of Singing in the Rain, I was given permission to bring my umbrella in. So if you see some of those films, that's why I look a bit odd when I was making the speeches. What I'm doing in relation to the coronation is I'm just going to watch it on the telly like everyone else. I'm not a great royalist. I'm a Republican. I want to be a citizen, not a subject. But I do hope the occasion goes well, and I do understand the importance of tradition and history. Again, something we'll be doing a Substack on in terms of the importance of understanding history, which we'll do at the weekend for you to read. And I do know somebody who's been selected in the ballot from the House of Lords to go. They've cut back on the number of peers who are allowed to go. But Kate Hoey has got in on the ballot. And so I'm delighted because she, Baroness Hoey, is so pleased to be invited. And I'll be watching her and looking out for her when I'm watching the telly at the weekend. Before that, and finally, and just to advertise it, I'm speaking at the Swindon Literary Festival on Friday evening, and the details are below. The Swindon Literary Festival is have been asking me to speak for some time, for many years in fact, and I haven't ever been able to do the date. This time I am, and I'm going to speak on I Find That Offensive, my book, and on the whole free speech controversy. Inevitably, absolutely inevitably, there's been an attempt at cancelling me, a local campaign that I should not have been invited. So bad back or not, I'm going to go and I'm going to do my speech and not let anything stop me. And I hope if you're in the Swindon area that you'll come along and hear me at 6:30 on Friday evening. I think that it'll be interesting because I was really gratified that the organisers of the festival just said, well, you know, they can try and cancel you, but you wrote a book, you're going to come and speak about it, and if they want to argue back, they can, and I hope that's what will happen. But that's the kind of resistance we need, isn't it? And my final thought is I'm a great fan of Nick Cave and his music. And Nick Cave, would you believe it, is going to the coronation. God knows I got an invitation, but he's a celebrity who has got a mind and really thinks interestingly, as you can tell from all the lyrics of his fantastic songs over the years. And he's written a statement about why he's going to the coronation, despite the fact that he's not a great royalist. And I've put a link to it below because I actually think it's really thought-provoking. And the Academy of Ideas wants people to think, is interested in interesting people who don't go along with the crowd, who don't do what's expected of them. And Nick Cave gives, in his statement, all the reasons like intellectual curiosity, understanding history, being at a great event, that made me think he was just the kind of person that we would like to get involved in our Battle of Ideas Festival, which is where I'll finish. All morning we've been planning this year's Battle of Ideas Festival. The Battle of Ideas is October the 28th and 29th. We can't rely on local elections, general elections to shake up politics. We've got to do it ourselves. We can't rely on Parliament, as I've always said. And the Battle of Ideas Festival is an attempt at really creating a grassroots movement of people who might come at politics from all sorts of different angles, left, right, apolitical, in the middle, not sure, politically homeless, but who are committed to building a free society. And so you should buy your tickets. We're going to be having a range of debates on all sorts of issues, from chat GBT and what artificial intelligence means, through to whether we can solve the problems of development in the economy, build any houses, and all of the free speech issues of our day, all of the moral dilemmas that we face all the time. So get your ticket and see you there. And Nick Cave, if you're watching, you're welcome onto any panel as far as I'm concerned. See you next week.